Hey, it's Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and I want to thank all of the expert moderators and panelists for being a part of these Insight Jam discussions today. The launch of InsightJam.com has been incredibly rewarding with all of the contributions we're receiving from the experts, solution providers, and end users. It's really been quite a sight to see. If you haven't joined InsightJam.com already, please do. And if you have, please invite some of your colleagues to join as well. And again, thanks very much for being here and enjoy today's discussions.
Solutions Review presents Inside Jam, a social media community for enterprise technology. My name is Jonathan Paul. I'm the Director of Multimedia and Events here at Solutions Review, and I am pleased to welcome in our next and final group of the day as we discuss Passkeys, the great password killer. Rebecca, Chase, Jason, Kayne, and Pedro, thank you so very much for joining me. It is a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for giving us an hour of your time to discuss today's topic. We'll begin with some introductions. Rebecca, you've agreed to moderate, so I'll allow you to go first. 30 seconds or less. Tell the audience a bit about yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm Rebecca Herold, aka the Privacy Professor. I've been an IT professional for over 35 years, focusing on information and computer security and privacy. And among other things, I built a change control system for a Fortune 100 corporation and worked for the National Institute of Standards and Technology as a subject matter expert, co-author of many of their security and privacy standards since 2009. And I've owned my own consulting business since 2004. I've worked extensively with authentication methods and access controls throughout my entire career. And I really look forward to delving into Passkeys in particular with my fellow panelists today.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Over to Chase. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm not nearly as cool as Rebecca, so I'll be a lot shorter. My name is Chase, I'm principal strategist here at JimCloud, and so I spend a lot of my time thinking about modern authentication strategies, how we implement that with our customers. So I'm really excited to dive into today's topic and spend a little bit more time with you all there.
Excellent. Over to Jason Kent. Welcome.
Hi there, I'm Jason Kent. I'm a hacker in residence at Sequence Security. We do a lot of monitoring for big platforms that have APIs on them. We see tons of credential stuffing attacks. I'm really excited to talk about passkeys and passwords today. But I've been doing this for about 25 years. I threw my first angry tick mark at a website in 1998. I've also done a lot of Wi-Fi hacking, and I'm just really excited to be here and share some of my experience.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. Over to you, Kayne. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm Kayne McGladrey, the field CISO for Hyperproof, which is an automated compliance and risk management platform. I'm also a senior member of the IEEE for my work in the past 30 years now in cybersecurity. But I'm also that guy on LinkedIn who posts funny memes about regulatory and legal changes because often this content is fairly dry. And today I'm looking forward to really helping to contribute to the conversation around some of the regulatory as well as the risk reductions associated with use of passkeys.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Pedro.
Hi, hello. Glad to be here. My name is Pedro Martinez. I am business owner for authentication solutions at Thales with focus on BFSI, financial services. I've been working on security and authentication for over 25 years in different positions and places. I'm currently based in Spain, but I've been living in Austin, Texas for many years.
I'm going to step out of the way and let Rebecca handle things from here with our opening remarks and first question. So take it away.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. So I want to give a really quick high-level crash course in passkeys. So first of all, people and businesses have been frustrated with, and many voicing their really explicit hatred for, computer passwords since Fernando Corbato first presented the idea of passwords at MIT in 1960. The FIDO Alliance, and FIDO stands for Fast Identity Online, they launched in 2013 an initiative to, quote, solve the world's password problem, which sounds great. And they were going to develop a global, secure, passwordless authentication standard based on public key cryptography. Now, a passkey is a credential that's based on FIDO protocols, and it can be used to access a digital account such as your email, social media account, or digital banking account, just as a few examples. And generally, each passkey can only be used for a single account. We must prove that you own your own passkey with user verification method and so on. So we're going to go way beyond these generalities today. And I'm very excited to moderate and participate in this important discussion to provide our viewers with a better understanding of passkeys and explore whether or not a passkey truly can be technically and non-technically a password killer, which brings us to the first question for our panel. With everything else that's out there right now on the passwordless market, such as using third-party identities and mobile phone biometrics and one-time authentication links and so on, why should passkeys even be considered? So Chase, why don't you go first?
You know, it's an interesting topic because you see passkeys being adopted at a faster rate than any other type of authentication mechanism out there. And there's really three big things that are helping to move that along. One, I've seen we have a lot more biometrics, as you mentioned, across our devices, right? So that platform authenticator that's happening across, I can do Windows Hello or Touch ID or use my face, kind of all those things are happening across that area. Another element was you actually had Google, Microsoft, Apple kind of all come together and say, hey, this is a really great idea. So let's start to implement that. And odds are, you know, I'd say, especially across the panel, like we probably touch at least those types of companies. I know I touched at least 2 out of 3. And then finally, you have this notion that it's kind of starting to spill over into the consumer area too. So we typically think about, you know, as you mentioned, kind of passwordless, it's like one provider and kind of come through and that really manages the corporate identity. But now you have a little bit more on the consumer side as well. So now there's a lot more people that are starting to transition, say, okay, now I'm going to use this in several different places. So the adoption is starting to explode. And so I'm really excited to see as that continues to take us on.
I think that the best part about Passkeys is they're user-friendly, right? It's something that people can understand. It's not difficult. If you have the passkey with you, you can log in. If you don't, you can not log in, which makes it very phishing resistant. And that's the nice thing is from a technology perspective, it's based on public key cryptography, which is really obfuscated. It's something the end user doesn't need to think about, which previously, if anybody's done any work in crypto here, cryptography, that's not something you roll out to consumers on a broad, easy basis.
Okay, wonderful. And who would like to go next? I will let either of you go ahead.
I'll hop in. So as someone that deals with the other side of this, with all the password problems, right? Credential stuffing attacks go away using this kind of authentication. There's a bunch of really huge benefits. But I think the reason that we're starting to see this groundswell, as Chase and Kayne both pointed out, we're starting to see the ability to spread this out to users. You know, as somebody that sat down and developed and wrote their own or called up their own RSA keys and spread keys around internally for years, I've seen the value of it, and it's definitely something that we should have. It's just consumers have never really had a great way to deploy this. I think that's where we're starting to see the groundswell really pick up.
Yeah, I just to add on the same points that have been touched, but I think that what is really key, passkeys are great in terms of security. They are great in terms of user experience. They provide great benefits, improving a lot, not only the experience, but also the time and the success rate for service providers when it comes to authentication. So benefits for the companies, benefits for the end users. But there are plenty of technologies that come out, and not many get necessarily successful. The main factor of success is ubiquity, the fact that they are everywhere, available on any platform, supported by any of the platforms that we use to connect. I think that's the key factor.
Great, thank you. And I'll just add one more point too. I mean, look at the history of passwords. People are horrible at choosing good passwords. I mean, it never improves. So this would help to solve that problem. And plus, once people start using passkeys, I think it goes smoothly. And I think you got to get through that period. So now let's go on to the next question. So what is it about passkeys that's helped to move them into the spotlight for the industry? Kayne, let's go with you.
So I think that there's multiple benefits. I'm not going to cover them all, but I'm sure my colleagues will pick up everything that I missed here. I'd say the first is that there's some enhanced security, really, because they, as you've said, the people are terrible at picking passwords. Humans are actually not very good at being random, it turns out. And so passkeys eliminate the vulnerabilities associated with the passwords, like them being easily guessed or stolen or being phished. But they also remove the need for us to remember complicated passwords or to have extensive password vaults or password safes or notebooks, what we've got. The other thing I'd say is that we've seen broad adoption across the industry here. So we've got companies like Google and Apple and Microsoft who have not historically always been best of friends. They're actually moving to support passkeys, which really is helping to accelerate the adoption and the integration across all the platforms. And they're interoperable. That's, I think, the best part of it is that you don't have your Google passkey versus your Apple passkey versus, because at that point, again, if we get into a walled garden mentality, it becomes very difficult to see that widespread adoption, both in the consumer space as well as in the enterprise space, because enterprises are inevitably going to be heterogeneous, and you have to be able to support as many combinations as is feasible.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll hop in there because I think there's an element too where you're not only increasing the security, but it's making it easier for users, right? Typically, whenever you implement additional measures of authentication, whether it's push MFA or something else, or like, temporary codes, it's like, oh, there's one more thing that I have to go do now. Yet as a user, it's like, great, I don't need to. I just look, all right, I got my device, right? It's already there and it's with me. And so that increases adoption because it's actually making my life easier. And so it's one of those rare instances where you have increased security while decreasing the user friction, and that helps increase the just overall adoption and usage.
Yeah, I think that's not highlighted well enough for everybody. If you could tell a retailer, listen, I can take a whole step out of somebody buying something from you and make it much faster, they'll definitely say, I want to go do that. If you tell a bank, I can make it much more secure for all of your end users, right? All of these great things that it brings us, we've said that about lots of different products, right? We've said that over the years lots of times. So what makes this a lot different is its ease of use and its ubiquity, right? That point that you made earlier, we can get it to everybody pretty fast, and it makes everything better. That's really what you're looking for, right, in security. My only challenge is what happens when you lose it, right? Then it becomes, oh no, I've got to recover.
I just would like to add, I think that we were starting by looking at this as it's an improvement in security and it's an improvement in convenience, which has not always been the case, as Chase was saying. But as we are reaching the point where now the service providers are thinking about implementing, what we are starting or have started to implement, what we see or what they see is an actual business benefit. The possibility of having a better level of engagement with customers, the fact that users can log into their services much more easily without finding themselves as we find ourselves so easily in that situation where you don't forget, you don't remember your password and you have to go through a password reset. The fact that it's so much easier to log in with a much better success rate, I think that makes a difference as well for service providers.
Can I double click on Jason's comment about banks, though, Rebecca, just for a brief moment? So
Sure.
I think that there's a benefit, but it's not a widely accepted benefit here. And it comes down to risk, and it comes down to risk mitigation and risk management. And ultimately, when you think about banks adopting this, I want to separate this out. There's banks that are adopting this passkeys internally because it reduces the risks of a breach and they don't have to worry about the costs associated with a data breach. But that's for corporate employees and also for a lesser extent for contractors. But when it comes to actual consumers, I have a bank account at a credit union. I have a bank account at a major bank. I have an investment account. None of them support passkeys right now. And the reason that they don't, if you think of the way an executive is going to look at a corporate risk register, they're going to say, okay, internal data breach that shows we didn't have adequate security or responsible security or whatever we want to call it today, that's a problem. But if somebody's bank full on gets stolen, right? If somebody just yeets all of your money out, $250,000, insurance by FDIC. Now, Is there going to probably be a lawsuit? Is there going to probably be some oversight? Yeah, but they have a compensating control right now. And I think where that'll be challenging is for banks and similar industries as well to adopt this out to larger populations. I do say though that retailers, my pet food store does use Passkeys, and I love them for that.
Yes, and we will get on to some of those issues you talked about, Kayne, with regard to the risk and the downside. So we will come back to that. I also want to mention, too, another point. It was mentioned earlier, it was about compatibility, because I think the ability to use a consistent, repeatable protocol across all types of technologies is something that currently is not truly out there. So, the concept of passwords is one thing, but yet the actual protocol for how to use them consistently to make everyone as secure as possible is a different thing. So now let's go on to the next question, which is, so what does a good passkey? See, I'm so used to saying password, it just comes out. But so what does a good passkey strategy look like? And how do IT teams enforce that strategy in the workplace? Because that can be a challenge. So Jason, let's start with you.
Yeah, so anytime I talk about keys, I'm going to bring up this guy Kirchhoff. And he says that the algorithm doesn't matter, the way you derive things doesn't matter, the protection of the key is what matters, right? And this is a case where we need to have good protection, but it also needs to have some amount of transportability. So I need to be able to keep this key with me no matter what happens. I can lock it into a secure enclave, or I can put it someplace where I can always have access to it. But the challenge is going to be the logistics around maintaining that key and keeping it with you at all times. And then the second problem that I think is going to be kind of carried along with the keys is what happens when I need to change it. We've all had a cert die, right, on a web server or on an email server, and it causes havoc, right, because you now need to reload a new cert on there and get it spread out. This is the same kind of problem that we're going to see. Now, I think we've solved these problems well. It's just spreading it out to consumers is going to be a big challenge, I think, for these organizations.
Who wants to go next?
Yeah, I'll take it. In fact, it's interesting because over the last year and a half, we have started to see a number of service providers, and we have seen different strategies. No? And one of the first questions is, should we offer the possibility for users to switch from passwords to passkeys, or should we be more assertive and should we be pushing them or presenting that as the new default option? No? And well, obviously the adoption rates that you see in one case and in the other are different, but we have seen how, for example, Apple enforced and decided to start using passkeys for their own service with the release of iOS 17, and they have done it without much notice to the end users. It's a question on whether there is a lot to inform to the end users about deploying passkeys, or if it is a switch that the service provider must decide to do and take it full on with all consequence about that. Obviously, not all service providers can act the same way, but it's an important question there. Kayne.
So I want to take a step back because I feel like we're doing technology is cool. Technology is cool. No business buys technology because it's cool unless you're a technical business. The reason we buy technologies, and this is a control, a passkey is just straight up an example of a technical control. The only reason they do it is if there is a business justification. And in this case, it's going to be about net reduction of risk that the business cares about. And I think that when you think about using a control like passkeys and you want to make a business case for using it, something that folks have to work through is how are you going to measure and report on the use of your passkeys and then link that automatically back to your reduction of potential risks to the business? Because if you don't do that, we're ending up doing technology for technology's sake. Somebody's going to say, well, it costs too much, or it isn't actually doing what we expected it to do. And then on the actual implementation of it, once we've got through the business level agreement that, hey, this is a technology that works, it's trustworthy, it will reduce our risks, and we have a way of predictably measuring that reduction of risks, then beyond just the training that Pedro spoke to, we have to start having a way of auditing to determine, like, are we managing our compliance and our risk better? And are we addressing our security risks on a consistent basis through the use of passkeys? And I think finally there has to be, this might go into procedure updates. I tend to think in those a lot because I've worked at companies that have been audited a horrendous number of times. Like, make sure you don't still say, yeah, we use passwords if you're using passkeys. Like, put that in there, because when the auditor sees that, they're going to go, oh, well, actually, they're probably doing a more reasonable job. I don't need to look at this as hard as if they say, yeah, we're using one character passwords and no MFA.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that we typically see as well when you're looking at passkeys. We almost think about it in a broader sense, but like, well, we want to do more passwordless, right? And passkey is a way that you're able to implement some of those. But, and just don't underestimate that not everyone's ready for this. And so we do a survey every 6 months, and we recently talked to over 1,200 IT admins across US, UK, India, and ask a bunch of different questions. But one of the things that came out was actually there's still 20% of those organizations that don't even have a password manager implemented, right? So even kind of at the base level crux. So you got to start thinking about, how does this fit into a larger passwordless kind of story? And so you might not be ready for passkeys. Maybe it's just getting single sign-on set up. So it's one less thing that you have to worry about. And then starting to think, as you start to go down that implementation journey, kind of what is the feedback loops? As Kayne mentioned, like the audibility of this is like, great, you set it up, but can you tell who's accessing what, or kind of who gave them permissions in the first place? That needs to be thought out in terms of, as you start to think about these different elements that you want to think in a kind of more holistic authentication strategy.
Absolutely. And I agree with everything you guys have said. Plus, I want to add a little bit more too, because the planning is so important. I built the security and privacy program at Principal Financial Group throughout the 1990s. I learned a lot of hard lessons there. And one of the things you want to make sure you do, don't go out and try to boil the ocean all at once. So if you're rolling out passkeys, first of all, where are you going to have the most value, in what subsection or subnet within your entire digital ecosystem? I would definitely recommend that you look at where is passkey going to bring you the most benefit first, learn from that experience, and then start phasing it out into other areas, just to make sure that you can learn from your mistakes of a small group before you try to roll it out to the world or the universe of all of your users. And don't forget about your third parties that you've subcontracted, because there's going to be APIs connecting you and cloud services and so on. So,
Rebecca, can I just add on to what you just added in there? Because I think it might be, like you said, subnets, and not all of us have subnets anymore because we sometimes are cloud focused. I think an easy way to determine is a passkey potentially a good fit? Look in your risks associated with your most critical systems, and those are like the 5 systems that have to come online after a disaster. They have either a business continuity plan or disaster recovery plan, one of the both. Right? If you're trying to figure out where do I start with passkeys, start there, because if that is the thing that the business cares about the most, that it has to be that important, now definitely don't do a big bang approach. Like, figure out how you're going to deal with how to integrate the authentication, but also what you're going to do with a lost device or a stolen device or an allegedly stolen device, which is even more nefarious. But that's the ones to start with, where you're going to be able to show progressive reduction in risk to the management team, rather than, I think it gives us clearer guidance for where to go, rather than asking the application owners who wants to go first, because very few of them are going to go, oh yeah, that sounds like fun, you could wreck my stuff, because there is that fear that you have to get through. And if you've got that business case to get past it, it makes it a lot quicker.
It does. And definitely too, make sure your key stakeholders are involved in that, because you have to have their assistance with it. But also, the other point I was going to add earlier was that you need to make sure you update your security and privacy policies and supporting procedures accordingly. Don't forget to do that. To your point earlier, Kayne, you have to make sure that you're going to pass an audit. So you need to make sure your policies and procedures, are corresponding to those. So now let's go on. We've gotten the strategy laid. So what does failure look like for passkeys? What tools are cyber attackers using to conquer the passkeys, and what kind of impact can teams expect when the bad actors succeed? So, Pedro, how about you? What would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, first of all, one measure of failure of Passkeys is obviously it obviously evolves around adoption. Failure for Passkeys, a measure of failure of Passkeys will be whether there is a good level of adoption or not. I was at EIC and there was some major retailers that have already been deploying and there are when you have a good level, a good adoption rate, that's going to indicate you that you're going into the right direction. If not, it means that maybe your strategy for deployment is not the most appropriate. That from the perspective of adoption. From the perspective of security, I mean, there is some level of success when you have implemented Passkeys. The weakest link, which was the password, obviously, it's not replaced by the passkey, and what we see is that hackers are focusing on other areas that are not directly attacking on the passkey, but attacking on the methods that you have for enrollment for the passkey, which is separate from that, or to issues related to session management on the browser side. So the fact that we have moved away from the actual authenticator, that's a good measure, a good sign. But obviously there are new axes of attack.
Wonderful. Go ahead, jump in, Phyllis.
I guess I will. I imagine Jason's going to come in with some super awesome stuff in terms of face mask biometrics and all that. But I will take it in a slightly different direction where let's assume that it's just like the most secure device, but then let's also assume that's going to be hacked, right? I remember when SMS codes came out and like, oh, this is going to be great, right? And then fast forward and it's like, okay, no one uses that anymore. Because of vulnerabilities and everything else. And I think the biggest element that we're starting to see is much more the human element. So let's assume it's like the most secure device, but like I'm still hacking the human behind it. And so even though you might have all these other pieces, attackers will just kind of switch lanes a little bit more. We actually found this stat where the number of phishing attempts increased by like 12,000% after ChatGPT came out, right? Because you're like, hey, just write a 3 email sequence convincing this person to kind of do something. And so like you're still kind of coercing people around that. And I think that's still kind of the biggest vulnerability that we have in terms of organizations, while passkeys and other elements kind of help secure the device level.
Yeah, so my concerns don't, I'm not really worried about somebody showing a picture to a biometric device because we've already proven that works. That's where's the fun in that gig. But think about, okay, I've got to put a public-private key pair somewhere. Accessing that private key somehow, breaking into the enclave on the phone or whatever that thing is, means now I own this system. But like we're seeing today, even with passwords, once you're authenticated, it's the authorization layer that causes all the problems. If I log in with my passkey, so if I'm allowed to be on the network, but you just allow me in as an admin, I get to go wreak all the havoc I want still. It's, not going to take that problem away. I think what we need to really understand is how we can integrate systems much more easily so that the consumers can do, better, if you will, with whatever solution we're presenting them with. So for instance, if you present somebody with, you need to come up with a password, like Kayne said, they're not going to come up with a good one. It's not going to be random. It's not going to be very good. So these keys make it so that it's, very tied to one person, and it makes it a lot easier to do that. But if I get a hold of that key, then I win. And that's the kind of stuff that really scares me about the new and better, right? Is as soon as I get a hold of the base of this thing, I get to win. And so we see, with our retailers that we're sitting protecting, we see password attempts as constant. It looks like the password is going to be the same thing. And if somebody can figure out how to get into that private key enclave, they're going to be sending information that the other keys can decrypt. So it's never going to be a perfect solution as long as we don't implement it correctly. One of the other challenges I always see with my clients is they'll implement, say, OTP off of SMS or something like that, but they'll leave their username and password channels still open in their APIs. Well, if I have to have a passkey to authenticate, but there's a side channel where I don't, that's where they're going to attack you. The attackers are going to show up wherever it's easiest. You can't bang your way through the brick wall when there's a door right next to it that's open.
Absolutely.
These points to think through it. So I want to draw everybody's points together here because what we've said is we're going to do this project. We're going to have Passkeys. It's going to be great. We've told the senior executive team. We've told the end users. And then because of some technical attacks that very few people outside of the cybersecurity team or the IT team understand, like what is session hijacking? What is an enclave? People aren't going to think about that. They're going to go, wait a second, we just spent a whole bunch of money and we were going to reduce our risk. We're going to up-level our security, and the users and stakeholders in a breach scenario are going to lose trust in that new security control, or alternatively, they're going to lose trust in the person who sold them that security control, possibly both. And so I think as we work through these scenarios, it's not a one and done. I think a phased rollout is very appropriate for this, and to make sure that you've got measurable gains that you can show to your end users as well as to your executives, that for end users, hey, look, you don't have a password, you just can log in, you walk up, you've got your key, beep, you get in, everybody's happy there. And I can think in like a healthcare scenario, for example, that becomes material because that's cost savings in time. And if you've ever worked in healthcare, you know they measure things very closely in time. But at an executive level, that time becomes a cost savings. But if some other control fails, right? As our hacker in I love that title, hacker in residence. As he said, if some other control fails around authorization, right, Jason, that we're going to then lose the end user's trust because they'll think, well, we just did this whole passkey thing. It must suck. No, you have to have your other controls as well, reducing your risk and have good visibility and possibly even red team this, Jason, after it's been deployed to make sure there aren't any gaps.
All good points. And I want to offer a few more too. I love looking at risk because I think you got to do that. And it's not done enough. So to continue on with the possible risks, you know, passkeys are generally associated to individual devices a lot of times, which really it poses a challenge for those without access to personal mobile phones or laptops. Or here's a big one. When people depend upon shared computers within their digital ecosystem, especially within certain types of industries. For instance, I work with and help a lot of construction, work sites, factories, hospitals, as Kayne mentioned earlier, libraries. Those are some very risky areas also because of the influx of others who are in the areas where they are not folks who are authorized to be on the network or having access to digital assets. So, you know, we have to think about the risks that are related to using passkeys within the environments and also where you're sharing and so on, and switching just between different ecosystems because not everyone uses just one device, right? So I've seen people carrying around 3 different types of phones and their laptop, and then they go sit down at their desk and they have 2 different desktops that they're working on simultaneously. So that's an issue too. So there's compatibility issues as well. So that brings up a lot of issues. And before we go on to our next question, I don't know if anyone wants to offer kind of a parting thought on this, because I think it's really important to think about the risks. We love the benefits, but we need to think about the risks too.
I think that we have to make a different. Obviously, I mean, passkeys, we see the benefits, no, but we have to understand that there are different types first of storage points for passkeys. We think typically on platforms because that's where what is going to give us the ubiquity and the availability for everyone. But you were talking now about a case where you are having shared devices, and obviously, I mean, you're not going to be storing personal passkeys on devices that are shared. We have to, for certain cases, so the 3 main substrates that we have the platforms itself, the operating systems of computers and tablets and smartphones. But then we have tokens. We have tokens that can be very appropriate for, especially for enterprise use cases, for B2E, for security for employees. Those represent an option that is a more appropriate one in many cases. And the third option that we don't have to forget is that there is the option as well that we see particularly valuable in regulated markets, such as in finance, to store or to handle your passkeys through a mobile app. And you can do that by the integration of an SDK that implements the FIDO layer. And the benefit of that, we have not talked about synchronization, but what that allows is to ensure that the service provider will keep full control on those passkeys without intervention of any third party, and can, more than anything, especially very important in Europe, for example, for finance market, will ensure that those passkeys remain device bound. They will not be spread into any other device. And being the passkeys device bound, you can ensure compatibility with regulations as PSD2 for financial institutions in Europe. So we have to think of the different substrates and the different use cases, B2E to B2C, and not all the verticals of all the industries may have the same requirements and the same best solutions.
Can I also share a success story around passkeys? Because this kind of got a little negative there. So I want to kind of bring us back to the positive side of this. So you have to tie it back to a business risk. I think we can all agree on that. So there's this war going on in Ukraine, right? You just brought up that. There's suddenly warfare here. And the problem that they were facing, the risk that they were facing, was user impersonation, which allowed people who were adversaries in Russia to get into Ukrainian systems. And their solution there was, first of all, a line that, hey, this is not a business problem. This is I guess, I don't know, maybe the Army operates like a business. Not sure. But they said, this is a real risk that we have. We have proof that this is happening. They deployed 30,000 passkeys throughout their government within the span of a month. Right? They said, this is a genuine problem we have. We are going to lift and shift our architecture very quickly. And I love that it succeeded at that space, because a lot of CISOs can go, okay, well, we're going to limit the reduction of risk of a breach or something else, but it's going to be a very long period of time. It doesn't have to be. If you have the right motivations in place, and if you have the right organizational support where everybody goes all in and says, yes, this is what we're doing, you can get it out there very fast in a non-hypothetical scenario.
Excellent. That's a great example. And I think it leads to our next question pretty good too, because, that dealing with something when you're in a very unique type of situation means you're replacing other forms of authentication, perhaps. So what do you think? Will passkeys replace other forms of passwordless authentication? And will they become the new standard over other tools like random code generators, and why or why not? So I know that's more than one question, but they all link together. So let's see, who hasn't started for a while? Kayne, why don't you start this time?
Well, I think they do have the premise of getting rid of random code generators. I think that those still can be fairly secure, except for the SMS-based ones. And the way of securing the SMS-based ones, turns out, is put a message at the header that says, your bank will never call you and ask for this number, right? That's the way we've learned to secure that. But I think random code generators are secure, but they're not very convenient. If you are a person who has disabilities, I hope that's the right term, you can actually have trouble putting in that 30-second time frame to actually enter in a key code of 6 or 8-digit number, whereas it's very easy to tap a biometric or to alternatively insert a key into a physical device to indicate, yes, you've got it there. So I think that there's that possibility of replacing it. And I think that ultimately, the reason we choose to do that is that passkeys address multiple vulnerabilities. We've all talked about the vulnerabilities associated with passwords, but also other authentication mechanisms that are in use, but it's going to require a theme that's come throughout this, right? Like all the companies, all the major tech companies really do need to adopt this, but also we need to see more adoption in the consumer space, because ultimately, I think if people are in school right now and they're used to the fact that their bank does passkeys for authentication and their pet food store does it and their grocery store does it and their streaming service does it, and then they get to their first big office job and they walk in and they've got an 8-character password, they're going to wonder, what the heck? How? Why? How do they not get forward? And I think if we have that societal up-leveling where this just becomes the new standard, the new norm, it'll be a lot easier to drag business forward in cases where they've been reluctant or think, hey, we can't get this done or it's too costly.
Yeah, well, and being the new standard or norm, that's a challenge. What are the rest of your thoughts out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we got a really good chance this time, right? And so I think part of it is because we're covering so much of the device, and like, this is what we're operating on. This is what we're having this call on. You know, I carry this thing around. It has that element, but there is the kind of the service provider side, right? And so again, coming back into kind of larger authentication areas, even single sign-on, like, it hasn't been adopted, and there's still a lot of organizations that will just charge you extra, right? So if you go to sso.tax, there's a great list in there, like Slack's another one, where in order to even use that functionality, it's a premium. And that type of adoption within larger organizations, companies, other pieces, like, it comes at the cost of other features, right? So if I'm looking at my roadmap and I want to deliver a feature that will have this amount of revenue versus implementing this feature that will have passkey functionality for my users, it's a bake-off decision. Well, are we going to do that? And so it really depends on making sure that there's a security focused mind, right? Again, coming back into that kind of consumer behavior, making sure we have that. So my hope is over time, we'll start to get there, but we'll still end up having to manage a bunch of different stuff, right? I still have my Google Authenticator app on my phone because there's still 20 different services that only use that. And so hopefully we start chugging people along in the right way.
Well, just riding along on Kayne's idea that, you know, businesses are going to look at this with the idea of, how do I benefit from it, right? Where do I get, is this going to make us more money, or is this going to help us in any way? I can just imagine somebody casting an eyebrow up and going, this again? When you come to them and say, we want to implement, you know, another authentication mechanism. And so the true understanding that this is a better way to go does need to be pushed out. And the points brought up here really show that, right? We need more people to understand what this is going to do for their business and for their personal lives. Making things easier is always the thing we're trying to do. Making them more secure is the thing most people are concerned with.
Pedro.
No, I was going to say, tagging along with that, the part related to the service providers seeing the benefits, I think that is right now already something that is pretty much won, because we have some very heavy early implementers of the technology, such as Google themselves, that are not shy at all in reporting the success and the benefits that they are getting from the actual deployment of passkeys. When they are reporting an improvement of up to 4 times better success in authentication. So the success rate on authentication improved very heavily, and they are reporting at the same time a reduction of the time required for every user for authentication. That is something that service providers can translate into better engagement for end users, easier engagement with their end users, and I think that will be relatively solved. What I have more of a question is on how this is going to go with end users, because I wonder if we are going to win end users by educating them a lot and by example, or if it's going to be a decision, again, taken by the service providers, and users are going to find it out. If you think about it, the user experience for the end users, the essential user experience is, in the case of a phone, they are basically doing the same thing that they are doing for unlocking their phone, in only to present a passkey, and that's what they see as a user experience. I'm not sure if there will be a lot of education for end users, or if, on the contrary, it's going to be provided as a given and users are going to accept it, and information will be something that will be available for whoever is curious and wants to go and find it.
Well, and your comments are a very nice segue into our last question, because our conversation has gone great. So, that's really related to, is it going to replace other things? So for our last question, think about this. Ultimately, are passkeys going to be the password killer that we've been looking for decades? Can passwords truly die? And I'll start this round, because this is something that I've been looking at for many, many years. Access management and authentication solutions providers, they've been chasing the password killer dream, or dragon, if you want to call it that, since further back than multi-factor authentication. Actually, over 30 years ago in the 1990s, my gosh, at every conference I attended, single sign-on was the hot topic, which was kind of like the early version of password killers, right? Because, you only log in once, you never authenticate again. Well, right now, passkeys are once more a hot topic, and they have experts on both sides of the discussion. They're answering the question, is this the password killer solution, or is it just another tool in a long list of other tools? And so I guess for my 2 points I want to make, number one, there are many legacy systems. I think we have to always remember the legacy systems that we're going to have to deal with, depending upon how widely we want to implement passkeys. Legacy systems, according to a GAO report, found that on average, 31% of an organization's technology they depend upon are legacy systems. So how are those doing authentication to get into those systems, and what are the APIs that are involved? It may not be possible for passkeys to work with those systems, or it may be prohibitively expensive to get them, so they will. And then number two, new and emerging technologies. And I love the new technologies. I worked with NIST for 3 years building their IoT product, security and privacy standards. And AI-dependent tech, those are being engineered to utilize different types of authentication methods besides passkeys. So typically, some types of passwords are being used. Personally, I don't see passkeys as being the password killers in the foreseeable years, but I do see passkeys expanding greatly in use. So now, which of you wants to jump in on that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think especially too, as you start to think about the trend lines, you kind of outline and say, SSO used to be the thing, right? And that's typically because, it sit on your corporate directory, right? And kind of pull, and this kind of brings us back into, you got the authentication, but do you have the right authorization into each one of those? And so I think that adds that element in. So now you say, hey, I got my corporate directory, I got SSO. Now I have device management, and more importantly, that device identity, tying everything in together. And so again, I think we'll get really close. And I also bet that we're going to be typing in passwords for a while, right? Because even if we have it perfect on the corporate side, which I think is kind of how we have a lot of the mentality around it, again, coming back to previous comments, on the consumer side, who knows? And you might not want to, right? And so, for example, I'll be ordering Chinese from my favorite restaurant, and the way that they do authentication is email, get a code back, and come in. But it's I probably won't want to spend time doing passwordless just to set up on, my lo mein order. And, and that might be me. But it comes back into how much implementation versus risk are you willing to implement versus other features that might help drive your product roadmap or some of those other elements. So again, I think we're going to get really close, but we'll probably still be using a mix of different authentication methods just as we operate in 2024 and beyond.
Just to jump on that, I think, that is what's going to be the case. I mean, think about your IT infrastructure you currently own and you currently have in your personal life and you currently use at work. You probably got 50 different passwords, right? Even though you probably own devices that'll do biometric auth, that'll, store certs, any of those other things, right? We can move to this. It's going to be great, and it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm going to like the speed at which we can do things, but only on the places that accept it. It's unless we make it easy everywhere and easy every time, it's really going to be something that's an impediment for end users and internal users of organizations alike. We're going to have the Oktas of the world that do things, right? We're going to have all of these different solutions that are out there for the reasons that we need them. This is just another one that, personally, I think is a better arrow in the quiver, but we're still going to have all those arrows.
Yeah, and Rebecca, when you were talking about, SSO being the hotness in legacy applications, I was at Gartner Security and Risk earlier this week and met a friend of mine who was talking about Fortran, right? And for those of you who don't know that, that's a programming language. And the interesting thing is there's no way that you're going to get something Fortran on Big Iron to go run with a passkey. That's just a non-starter. And I think the challenge then becomes knowing what you said about how 31%, I think you said the OMB report. Anyhow, a lot of business still runs on legacy tech debt. And the challenge that businesses are going to have is not only supporting the new, fashionable, very useful, very reduction of risk technologies like passkeys, but also making sure that they have people who are still aware of how does this old stuff all work together? Like we are right now in 2024 dealing with .. vulnerabilities in VPNs, right? You just end up rubbing your temples. I come from a Unix background from 30 years ago. That was a common exploit back then. You would not think that you'd have that on internet-facing infrastructure. And the reason why the developers who inherited maintenance of that product, they didn't know that was a thing. Right? When passkeys ultimately tip over the horizon and become the new default, the new normal, where we all go, hey, this is a great reduction of risk, make sure we've got actually a way of measuring that we're still defending our legacy tech debt and not introducing these older vulnerabilities, because I guarantee you threat actors will rotate into those.
Yes. Pedro, do you have a couple of thoughts too? We're getting close to the end here, but I don't want to leave you out.
Sure. Well, I think that the password, the expression, the password killer, well, it depends on how you take it, no? I mean, are we going to drive passwords to extinction? No, it's going to be very difficult. There is going to be a lot of side cases and needs. But are passkeys going to become the prevalent form of authentication and go beyond passwords as the main mean for authentication, especially for consumer services? We are firmly convinced that they will. More easily in unregulated markets than in regulated markets, and more easily in regulated markets than in B2E environments, no, on corporate to employee. But we think that they have a bright future for sure.
Well, I think considering the time, and that was a pretty good wrap up, we've kind of touched on all those. So Jonathan, I know that you wanted to have a few minutes here at the end.
Thank you all again for your expertise over the last hour. It's been a pleasure listening into this conversation. As we wrap up now, though, I'd love to invite each of you 30 seconds or so to provide some self-promotion. Whether you have a LinkedIn, a blog, a podcast, a book, or your company solution, whatever you'd like to promote. We'll start with Pedro.
At Thales, we have been working on providing solutions around security and access, from deployment of SIM cards and banking cards to deployment of systems for authentication for digital services for many, many years. At this point, we are very invested on the success of Passkeys. We firmly believe in the technology. We work with the FIDO Alliance. We have been board members from pretty much the beginning, and we believe that we are going to witness the transition from other forms of authentication, especially based on OTP for multi-factor authentication, towards solutions based on passkeys, again with different characteristics depending on different markets, and we we are here to help our customers and whoever needs to make that transition to do that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Kayne, anything you'd like to plug?
Thank you. So if you're interested more about the regulatory or legal challenges in cybersecurity, or to watch me spit out beer almost all the time or make faces while I talk about FedRAMP, follow me on LinkedIn as Kayne McGladrey. If you want to learn more about the company I'm at and how you could measure the reduction of risks by using passkeys and other controls, check us out at hyperproof.io. And finally, if you want to learn about my work with the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers and how we're working to advance technology for humanity, check out IEEE.org.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. Jason, where would you like to send the audience?
Well, I work for one of the funnest companies on the planet, and I have one of the coolest jobs. So I'm going to talk about API security a little bit and tell you, if you have APIs and you would like to do some behavioral analytics on not only what your end users are trying to do, but stop them from doing it, give us a ring and we'll implement into your solution and tell you where the attackers are and how to get them out.
Sounds like a plan. Chase, how about you?
Oh, cool. Well, I wish I was super interesting, but I'm not. So I will default into a lot of the things that we talked about today. So you heard us talk about kind of SSO and directories and identity and device management, but that's actually what Jump Cloud does. And so we are open cloud directory where we're managing your cloud identities. We combine it with a full UAM, so we're managing those devices and those identities on it, as well as the access points, right, across SSO and networks and all those different pieces, bringing it back in. And we actually have our own passwordless solution called Jump Cloud Go, which leverages all the different technologies that we talked about today. And so you can check us out at jumpcloud.com and start a free trial, and you can try out passwordless for yourself.
Sounds like a plan. Rebecca, last but not least, anything you'd like to wrap up with?
Yeah, I'd love it if our attendees would follow us on LinkedIn, Privacy and Security Brainiacs. We also have a YouTube channel and putting out some 2-minute warning videos. We have a new secure coding course, new HIPAA compliance courses, policies and procedures. We have some upcoming courses and policies and procedures for IoT, Passkeys, and other tech. So yeah, just check us out, privacysecuritybrainiacs.com, privacysecuritybrainiacs.com. I really enjoyed being part of this panel today. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You are very welcome, and thank you again for moderating. Greatly appreciate you handling that today. That will do it for this, our final panel of our mini Jam Live for this Q2 of 2024. But don't worry, we'll be back later this year. I'm thinking sometime in Q3, and certainly again in December for our big Inside Jam Live event in December. As always, if you'd like to dive deeper into any of the topics discussed today, we encourage you to visit insightjam.com, an always-on destination for all your technology needs and research. And while you're there, make sure to check out tomorrow's exclusive jam session with Bob Eve. You can only watch this live panel event on insightjam.com. That happens tomorrow at noon Eastern. And of course, want to plug the YouTube channel as well, youtube.com/InsightJam. We're up to 137,000 subscribers. We would love for you all to join the party over there. We got podcasts, panel discussions, interviews, expert advice, and more. This has been a great day of coverage. Thank you again, one and all, for watching. We hope to see you again, and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.